The warm spring breeze rustled through the trees as an 11-year-old boy walked home from basketball practice, his worn orange ball tucked under his arm. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the suburban sidewalks, and the familiar sounds of children's laughter drifted from the nearby playground. This was his daily route, past the old oak trees, beyond the corner store where he sometimes bought his favorite candy, and through the neighborhood park where younger kids from the elementary school often played. Today felt just like any other Tuesday. He'd aced his math test, made 3 perfect shots during basketball practice, and was looking forward to his mom's promised spaghetti dinner. His jersey stuck slightly to his back from practice, and he could feel the pleasant tiredness in his muscles from giving it his all on the court. The basketball under his arm had been a birthday gift from his dad last year, and even though it was getting a bit worn, it was still his prized possession. As he walked, he thought about the superhero movie he'd watched with his dad last weekend. They had talked about how real heroes weren't just people with special powers. They were ordinary people who chose to do the right thing when it mattered most. His dad had told him stories about everyday heroes. Firefighters, teachers, and even kids who stood up for what was right. He didn't know it yet, but he was about to understand exactly what his dad meant. The neighborhood park was always busy this time of day. The red and blue playground equipment hosted a handful of kids climbing and sliding, while parents sat on nearby benches, some chatting with each other, others focused on their phones. The familiar ice cream truck melody played in the distance, and a group of birds pecked at forgotten sandwich crusts near the picnic tables. The boy adjusted his backpack, heavy with homework and gym clothes, as he walked past the swing sets. He knew most of the regular faces at the park. The kind old lady who always walked her golden retriever, the twins from 2 streets over who were always on the monkey bars, and the little girl from the house with the bright yellow door who loved the slide. Something caught his attention from the corner of his eye. Near the edge of the playground, where the neat park grass met the wild woods behind it, something seemed off. At first, he couldn't quite put his finger on what was wrong. It was like when you walk into your room and know something's been moved, but you can't tell what. Then he spotted it. A man he'd never seen before was talking to a little girl. The man wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, and something about the way he gestured toward the woods made the boy's stomach feel uneasy. His parents had always taught him to trust his instincts, to pay attention when something didn't feel right. Those lessons played in his head as he slowed his walk, keeping his eyes on the situation. The little girl, probably no more than 6 years old, wore a bright pink backpack with cartoon butterflies. She kept shaking her head, no, as the stranger pointed toward the trees, claiming he'd lost his puppy and needed help finding it. The boy remembered the safety assemblies at school, where they'd learned about stranger danger and the tricks some bad people used to lure kids away. His heart began to beat faster, and his palms grew sweaty against the rough surface of his basketball. Time seemed to slow down as he watched, knowing deep down that something was very wrong. The park suddenly felt different. No longer the happy, safe place he knew, but somewhere he needed to be brave, somewhere he needed to make a choice. He thought about walking away, about telling himself it wasn't his business. But then he remembered what his parents always said. If you see something wrong, be brave enough to help. The weight of what might happen next pressed on his young shoulders, but somehow it made him stand taller instead of shrinking away. Little did he know, his next actions would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone in their small community. The boy stood frozen for a moment, his basketball still tucked under his arm, as he watched the scene unfold. The stranger's voice carried across the playground, too sweet, too friendly, like sugarcoating something bitter. "It's just over there," the man said, pointing deeper into the woods. "My puppy's probably scared. We need to find him quickly before it gets dark." Something in the boy's memory clicked. Just last week, his teacher had talked about how real dangerous people often seemed nice at first. They didn't look scary like the villains in movies. They smiled, they acted friendly, and that's what made them so dangerous. The boy's mom had always told him that bad feelings in your stomach weren't just about eating too much candy. Sometimes they were warnings. The little girl clutched her butterfly backpack tighter, taking a small step back. Her pigtails swayed as she shook her head again. "I need to go home," she said, her voice tiny but clear. The boy could see she was scared, even though she was trying to be brave. It reminded him of how his little cousin looked when she was nervous about something but didn't want to admit it. Other kids played nearby, their laughter and shouts creating a strange backdrop to the serious scene playing out at the edge of the woods. The boy looked around at the adults on the benches. They were all distracted, some looking at their phones, others chatting with each other. None of them had noticed what was happening in the corner of the playground. His heart pounded so hard, he could feel it in his throat. The basketball felt heavy in his hands now, like it was filled with rocks instead of air. He thought about all the times his parents had told him to be careful, to stay safe, to avoid strangers. But they'd also taught him something else, that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always important. The man's friendly mask slipped for just a second when the girl tried to step away. His hand shot out, quick as a snake, grabbing her wrist. The girl's eyes went wide with fear, and she let out a small gasp that nobody else seemed to hear. The man's smile stayed fixed on his face, but his eyes had turned cold and hard, like stones at the bottom of a river. Time seemed to move in slow motion, like in those action movies the boy loved to watch. He saw the man start to pull the girl toward the trees. Her feet stumbled in the grass, her pink shoes leaving small scuff marks in the dirt. Her free hand reached out, grabbing at nothing but air, as tears started to form in her eyes. The boy's mind raced through all his options like flipping pages in a book. He could run to get an adult, but that would take too long. He could pretend he hadn't seen anything, but he knew that would be wrong. He could call out from where he was, but would that be enough? Every second felt like an hour as he made his decision. His legs started moving before his brain fully caught up. The basketball dropped from his hands, bouncing away across the grass, forgotten. His backpack felt heavy on his shoulders as he ran, but he barely noticed it. His heart was racing not just from fear now, but from determination. He knew he had to do something, and he had to do it right now. As he ran, memories flashed through his mind. His dad teaching him to stand up for what's right. His mom showing him how to be brave even when scared. His teachers explaining about helping others in need. All these lessons came together in this moment, pushing him forward, making him run faster than he ever had before. The distance between him and the edge of the woods seemed to stretch forever, like those nightmares where you run and run, but never get closer to where you're going. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was real, and he was the only one who could stop something terrible from happening. The boy's voice burst from his chest before he even realized he was shouting. "Hey, stop." His words rang across the playground like a bell, clear and loud. Some kids on the swings stopped mid-pump, turning to look. A few parents lifted their heads from their phones, startled by the sudden noise. Running faster than he ever had in basketball practice, the boy's sneakers pounded against the ground. The sound reminded him of his heartbeat, which was racing just as quickly. He wasn't thinking about being scared anymore. All he could think about was reaching the little girl before the man could drag her any further into the woods. "She doesn't want to go with you," he shouted again, his voice getting stronger with each word. He remembered what his gym teacher always said during their safety talks. Make noise. Lots of noise. Bad people hate attention. The boy could see he was right. The man's head snapped up at the sound, his eyes darting around nervously as more people began to notice. The little girl was crying now, quiet tears rolling down her cheeks, but she hadn't given up. She was pulling back against the man's grip, her butterfly backpack slipping off one shoulder. The sight made the boy even more determined. He'd never felt anything like this before. This mixture of fear and courage that made his whole body tingle with energy. Let her go. The boy was closer now, close enough to see the angry look that flashed across the man's face. It was scary, but somehow that just made the boy shout louder. "Help, he. Some bo do I help." His voice cracked a little, but he didn't care. He kept yelling, kept running, kept his eyes fixed on the girl who needed help. Everything his parents had ever taught him about being brave came rushing back. His dad's words echoed in his head. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared. Well, he was definitely scared now, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. The man's grip on the girl's wrist loosened for just a second as he looked around at the growing attention. That was all it took. The little girl pulled hard, stumbling backward as her arm came free. The boy reached them just in time to catch her before she fell. He stepped in front of her, making himself as tall as he could, spreading his arms out like a shield. By now, other people were running toward them too. A woman with a phone pressed to her ear was shouting something about police. Two dads from the playground were sprinting across the grass. The man looked from side to side, like a cornered animal, then turned and ran into the woods, branches cracking under his feet as he disappeared into the shadows. The little girl was shaking, but she managed to whisper a quiet thank you that made the boy's heart swell with relief. He noticed his own hands were trembling too, and his legs felt wobbly, like after running too many laps in gym class. But he stayed standing tall, kept himself between her and the woods until the adults reached them. Everything happened very quickly after that. Parents gathered around them, someone brought water, and another person wrapped a jacket around the little girl's shoulders. The boy could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. He sat with the girl on a nearby bench, talking to her about her butterfly backpack and favorite cartoons, trying to keep her calm while they waited for help to arrive. His own backpack was lying forgotten somewhere in the grass, probably right next to his basketball. But none of that seemed important now. What was important was that the little girl was safe, that he had listened to that feeling in his stomach that told him something was wrong, and that he had been brave enough to do something about it. As police cars pulled up to the park, their lights flashing blue and red across the playground equipment, the boy realized something his parents had always tried to teach him. Sometimes the biggest choices in life happen in just a few seconds. And what makes you a hero isn't having special powers. It's choosing to help when someone needs you. The park was now filled with flashing lights from police cars and the voices of concerned adults. The boy sat on the bench, his basketball and backpack finally retrieved by one of the helpful parents. His legs still felt shaky, like jelly after running a long race. Even though the danger was over, his heart hadn't quite settled back to its normal rhythm. Two police officers approached them, their badges glinting in the late afternoon sun. One of them, a kind-faced woman with curly hair pulled back in a neat bun, knelt down to eye level with the boy and the little girl. Her voice was gentle, like his favorite teacher's when explaining something important. "You both are very brave," she said, pulling out a small notepad. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" The boy took a deep breath and started telling the story, trying to remember every detail. He described the man's baseball cap, the way he pointed toward the woods, and how the little girl had said no. As he spoke, he noticed his voice was steadier now. The police officer nodded encouragingly, writing everything down with quick, careful strokes of her pen. Meanwhile, the little girl's parents had arrived, rushing through the crowd with worried faces that broke into relief when they saw their daughter. Her mom wrapped her in a tight hug, tears streaming down her face, while her dad kept thanking everyone around them. When they heard what the boy had done, they turned to him with eyes full of gratitude that made him feel both proud and shy at the same time. The second police officer, a tall man with friendly eyes, was talking into his radio, describing the man who'd run into the woods. More police cars were arriving, and officers with dogs were heading toward the tree line. The boy watched as they disappeared into the woods, their flashlight beams dancing between the trees like fireflies. Someone had brought hot chocolate from the nearby coffee shop, and the boy wrapped his hands around the warm cup, the sweet smell helping to calm his nerves. Parents who had been at the playground came over one by one to pat his shoulder or ruffle his hair, telling him how proud his parents would be. He wondered what his mom and dad would say when they found out. They were both still at work, but the police had called them, and they were on their way. The little girl was sitting with her parents now, but she kept looking over at the boy with big, thankful eyes. She'd stopped crying and was sipping her own hot chocolate, her butterfly backpack safely back on both shoulders. Her dad came over and shook the boy's hand, his grip firm but gentle. "You're a true hero," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We can never thank you enough." The word hero made the boy think about all those superhero movies he loved to watch. But this had felt different from those stories. There hadn't been any special powers or fancy costumes, just a scary moment and a choice to help someone who needed it. He realized that maybe that's what real heroes were, just regular people who chose to do the right thing, even when it was frightening. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, more neighbors gathered around. Some brought blankets, others brought snacks. The police were still searching the woods, but the scary feeling from earlier had been replaced by something warmer. A sense of community, of people coming together to help each other. The boy could hear snippets of conversation around him. Parents talking about organizing a neighborhood watch, making sure the playground was safer, looking out for each other's children. What had started as a frightening situation was turning into something that brought everyone closer together. Just then, he heard familiar voices calling his name. His parents were hurrying across the park, worry and pride mixing on their faces. As they got closer, he stood up, suddenly feeling both very young and very grown up at the same time. His mom reached him first, wrapping him in one of her big hugs that always made everything feel better. The boy's mom held him tight, and he could feel her heart beating fast against his cheek. His dad joined the hug, his strong arms wrapping around them both. For a moment, the boy felt like he might cry. Not because he was sad or scared anymore, but because he felt safe and loved and proud all at once. It was a big feeling, too big to keep inside. When the police called, his mom started, her voice shaky. She pulled back to look at his face, her eyes shining with tears and pride. "We were so worried, but then they told us what you did." His dad squeezed his shoulder, the way he did when the boy made a great shot in basketball or brought home a good report card. But this squeeze felt different, stronger, more meaningful. The police officer with the curly hair came over to talk to his parents, explaining everything that had happened. The boy listened as she used words like brave and quick thinking to describe him. It felt strange hearing someone talk about him that way. He hadn't felt brave or quick thinking at the time. He'd just known he had to help. Nearby, the little girl was still with her parents, now wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening. She looked tired but safer now, holding her mom's hand tight. When she caught the boy looking her way, she gave him a small smile, the first one since everything had happened. It made all the scary parts of the day feel worth it. More news was coming in from the police search. They had found evidence in the woods, a parked car hidden behind some trees, and footprints leading away from the park. Officers with dogs were following the trail, and police cars were patrolling all the nearby streets. The boy listened as the officers explained how his quick action had not only saved the little girl, but might help them catch someone who could have hurt other kids too. Parents from the neighborhood kept arriving at the park, drawn by the police lights and worried phone calls from friends. Each new arrival brought more support. Someone brought sandwiches from the deli down the street, another person handed out bottles of water. The playground, which had been a place of fear just hours ago, was becoming something else, a place where the community came together. The boy's teacher had heard the news and came to the park too. She hugged him and told him how the class had just learned about being upstanders, people who stand up for others, and how he had shown everyone exactly what that meant. The boy remembered that lesson, but it felt different now. It wasn't just words in a classroom anymore. It was something real he had done. As the evening went on, a local news reporter arrived with a camera. The boy's parents asked if he felt okay talking to them, and after thinking for a moment, he nodded. The reporter knelt down to his level, just like the police officer had, and asked him what made him decide to help. The boy thought carefully before answering. "I just knew it was wrong," he said simply. "My parents always taught me to help people who need it, and she needed help." The reporter smiled warmly, telling him that sometimes the simplest answers were the most powerful ones. The little girl's parents asked if they could take a picture of her with the boy, to remember this day not just for the scary parts, but for the brave parts too. They stood together near the playground, both tired but smiling now. The boy noticed that the little girl wasn't shaking anymore, and her butterfly backpack was perfectly straight on her shoulders again. As the sky turned purple with sunset, the crowd at the park began to thin. Some police officers were still searching with flashlights, but others were packing up to leave. The boy's dad suggested they head home too. Mom was making his favorite spaghetti dinner, after all. As they walked toward their car, neighbors called out goodbyes and thank yous. The boy felt different somehow. Older, maybe, or just more aware of how important it is to look out for each other. That night, dinner at home felt different. The boy sat at the kitchen table, twirling spaghetti around his fork while his mom added extra meatballs to his plate, his favorite. The familiar smell of garlic bread filled the kitchen, but even ordinary things felt special tonight. His parents kept looking at him with a mixture of pride and something else. Maybe relief, maybe love, maybe both. "You know," his dad said, passing the Parmesan cheese, "when I was your age, I don't know if I would have been brave enough to do what you did." The boy stopped twirling his spaghetti and looked up. His dad, who always seemed so brave and strong, who could fix anything and never seemed scared of anything, was saying this to him. His mom reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We've always taught you about doing the right thing," she said softly, "but teaching is one thing. Watching your child actually do it, that's something else entirely." Her eyes got a bit watery, but she was smiling. The phone kept ringing all through dinner. Relatives who had seen the news, neighbors checking in, even his basketball coach called to say how proud he was. The boy's aunt from 3 states away promised to send him his favorite cookies. His older cousin, who he always looked up to, sent a text calling him a real-life superhero. After dinner, while helping with the dishes, his mom insisted he didn't have to, but he wanted to. The boy heard his parents talking quietly in the living room. They were discussing ways to make the neighborhood safer, organizing parent patrols for the park, setting up a phone tree, maybe even starting a community watch program. His actions hadn't just saved one person. They were causing ripples that would help protect everyone. When bedtime came, the boy found it hard to sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw everything happening again. The man in the baseball cap, the little girl's scared face, the moment he decided to run toward them instead of away. His room looked the same as always. Basketball posters on the walls, homework on the desk, his favorite stuffed bear from when he was little sitting in the corner. But he felt different inside it. His mom came in to say goodnight, sitting on the edge of his bed like she always did. "Want to talk about it?" she asked, smoothing his blanket. The boy nodded slowly, then told her everything. Not just what happened, but how he felt. How his heart had raced, how scared he'd been, but how he knew he had to help anyway. Sometimes being brave means being scared but doing the right thing anyway, his mom said, echoing what they'd always taught him. But now he really understood what those words meant. It wasn't just something grown-up said, it was something he'd lived. Just before falling asleep, his phone buzzed with a message. It was from the little girl's parents, sent through his mom's phone. They'd attached a picture from the park, him and the little girl standing together, both tired but smiling. The message said they'd framed the same picture and put it on their wall to remember not just the scary day, but the brave boy who made it better. The boy lay in bed, looking at the photo in the dim light from his nightlight. The little girl's butterfly backpack sparkled in the camera flash, and he noticed something he hadn't before. Both of them were standing a little taller, a little stronger than they usually did. Maybe that's what bravery did to people, he thought. Maybe it helped you grow, even if you didn't notice it happening. As sleep finally started to come, the boy thought about tomorrow. He'd have to go back to school, face all his classmates, who probably knew what happened by now. But he wasn't worried about it. Something had changed inside him. Not in a way that made him feel different from his friends, but in a way that made him understand something important. Every person, no matter how young, had the power to make a difference. The next morning felt both normal and completely different. The boy got dressed for school, packed his backpack, and ate his breakfast like always. But when he looked out the kitchen window, he saw news vans parked along the street. His mom offered to drive him to school instead of having him take the bus, and for once, he agreed. Walking into school was like entering a different world. Kids stopped talking when he passed by, then burst into excited whispers. Some pointed, others smiled, and a few even clapped. His best friend ran up and gave him a high five, then launched into a million questions about what happened. Did you feel like Spider-Man? Were you scared? Is it true what they said on the news? The boy answered honestly, remembering what his dad had said of the importance of staying true to yourself, even when people treat you differently. I was scared, he admitted to his friend. Really scared. But sometimes you have to do things even when you're scared. His friend nodded, understanding in a way that made the boy grateful for their friendship. During morning assembly, the principal called him up to the stage. The boy's shoes squeaked on the polished floor as he walked up, hundreds of eyes following him. His hands felt sweaty, and his heart was doing that racing thing again. But this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from feeling shy about all the attention. The principal told the whole school what had happened, using it as a lesson about courage and doing the right thing. Then she announced something unexpected. The police department wanted to give him a special award for bravery. The whole school clapped and cheered, making the boy's face turn red, but somewhere inside, he felt a warm glow of pride. Later, during lunch, something even more surprising happened. Kids who had never talked to him before came to his table. But they weren't just asking about the rescue. They were sharing their own stories. One girl told him about standing up to a bully who was picking on her little brother. A boy shared how he helped a lost elderly woman find her way home. It's like you showed us we can all be brave, one of his classmates said, carefully opening her juice box. Like we don't have to be grown-ups to make a difference. The boy hadn't thought about it that way before, but she was right. His actions had done more than save one person. They had shown other kids their own potential for courage. His teacher used the afternoon class to talk about community heroes. Instead of their regular lesson, they discussed how ordinary people could do extraordinary things. The boy listened as his classmates shared stories about their parents, neighbors, and friends who had helped others in different ways. It made him realize that heroes weren't just in movies or books. They were everywhere, in everyday people making brave choices. After school, walking to his mom's car, he noticed something had changed in the way he saw his neighborhood. The crossing guard's smile seemed braver now. She kept all the kids safe every day. The older boys helping a younger kid who dropped his books weren't just being nice. They were being everyday heroes too. At basketball practice, his coach pulled him aside. You know, the coach said, tying his shoe that had come undone, what you did yesterday was a lot like basketball. Sometimes you have to take a shot even when you're not sure you'll make it. You took that shot, and you made it count. The boy had never thought about bravery that way before, but it made sense. The little girl's parents had called again, asking if he and his family would come to dinner at their house the next weekend. They wanted to thank him properly, they said, and maybe start a friendship between the families. The boy smiled when his mom told him. He liked the idea that something good, something lasting, could come from a scary moment. The weekend came quickly, bringing with it the special dinner at the little girl's house. The boy's mom had helped him pick out nice clothes, and his dad brought a homemade apple pie, the secret family recipe that always made everyone smile. As they walked up the driveway, the boy noticed bright butterfly decorations hanging from the porch, matching the little girl's backpack from that day. The house was warm and smelled like cookies fresh from the oven. The little girl ran to greet them at the door, wearing a bright yellow dress and the biggest smile he'd ever seen. She wasn't scared anymore. That's what struck him first. She was bouncing with excitement, eager to show him her toys and her pet goldfish named Bubbles. "I drew you something," she said shyly, pulling out a colorful picture. It showed two stick figures, one tall, one small, standing by a playground. Both figures wore capes, making the boy laugh. He hadn't worn a cape that day, but maybe bravery was its own kind of superpower. Her parents hung the drawing on their fridge with proud smiles. During dinner, the adults talked about the changes happening in the neighborhood. The police had increased their patrols around parks and schools. Parents had started a walking group, taking turns walking kids to and from school. The community center was offering free safety classes for children. The boy realized that his one action had started something bigger, like dropping a stone in a pond and watching the ripples spread. The police called today. The little girl's dad said, passing the mashed potatoes. They caught him. The room got quiet for a moment. The man who ran into the woods had been found in another town, trying the same trick at different playgrounds. Because of what happened at their park, police had known what to look for. The boy felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even known was there. After dinner, while the grown-ups talked in the kitchen, the little girl showed him her backyard. She had a treehouse, and they sat up there watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "I'm taking karate classes now," she told him proudly. "Mom says it's good to be strong and brave like you." The boy smiled, remembering how his own parents had always encouraged him to be strong in his own way. Back inside, the adults had a surprise. The local newspaper had done a story about what happened, and now other newspapers wanted to share it too. "Your story is inspiring people," the little girl's mom explained. "It's showing everyone that kids can be heroes too, that they should trust their instincts and help others." The boy felt his face getting warm again. He wasn't used to so much attention. But then he remembered something his teacher had said. Sometimes sharing your story helps other people find their own courage. Maybe that's why all these people wanted to hear about what happened, not just because of what he did, but because it reminded them of the good they could do too. Before they left, the families took another picture together, not just him and the little girl this time, but everyone. They were no longer strangers brought together by a scary moment, but friends sharing a happy evening. The little girl's mom hugged him tight and whispered thank you one more time, but it felt different now. It wasn't just about that one day anymore. It was about everything that had come after, the friendship, the community coming together, the changes that made everyone safer. Walking home under the stars, holding his parents' hands like he used to when he was younger, the boy felt peaceful. His dad was telling jokes, his mom was humming her favorite song, and the night was full of fireflies. Everything was different now, but in a good way. It wasn't just about being a hero on one day. It was about carrying that bravery forward, using it to make the world a little bit better, one small action at a time. 1 month had passed since that life-changing day at the playground. The boy stood on a small stage at the town hall, wearing his nicest clothes and trying not to fidget too much. The room was packed with familiar faces, his parents, his teachers, his basketball team, and so many neighbors. The little girl and her family sat in the front row, beaming up at him. The police chief, wearing her formal uniform with shiny badges, approached the podium. Today, she began, her voice warm and strong. "We're not just honoring one brave young man. We're celebrating what happens when someone chooses to do the right thing, no matter how difficult it might be." She held up a special certificate, its golden letters catching the light. As the police chief told the story again, the boy remembered how much had changed. The playground now had new safety cameras and better lighting. Parents had created a neighborhood watch program, taking turns keeping an eye on the parks and streets. Kids walked to school in groups, looking out for each other like a team. The community had grown stronger, closer, more connected. The little girl had joined his after-school basketball program. She wasn't very tall, but she was quick and determined. Sometimes, when they took water breaks, other kids would ask them to tell the story. They'd share it together now, not just the scary parts, but the good things that came after. How being brave one time had made it easier to be brave again and again. The mayor stepped forward with another surprise. She announced that the town was starting a new youth program, inspired by what happened. It would teach kids about safety, courage, and helping others. They were calling it the Young Heroes Initiative, and they wanted the boy to help launch it by sharing his story with other schools. Looking out at all the faces in the crowd, the boy realized something important. Every person there had their own kind of bravery. His best friend had stood up to bullies last week. The quiet girl from his class had helped a lost kindergartner find the right classroom. His basketball coach had organized a fundraiser for a sick player's family. They were all heroes in their own way. After the ceremony, there was a small party with cake and punch. The boys' basketball team presented him with a special jersey that had "Hero" printed on the back. He felt a bit embarrassed, but proud too. His coach whispered, "Sometimes the best players aren't the ones who score the most points. They're the ones who make the whole team better." The boy understood what he meant now. The little girl tugged on his sleeve, offering him a butterfly sticker for his award certificate. "My mom says butterflies are brave," she explained. "They start as tiny caterpillars but aren't afraid to grow into something beautiful." The boy smiled, carefully placing the sticker in the corner of his certificate. Sometimes the wisest words came from the smallest people. As the evening wound down, families lingering over cake and conversations, the boy's dad pulled him aside. "You know what makes me proudest?" he asked, straightening his son's collar. "Not just what you did that day, but who you've been every day since. You've stayed humble, kind, and true to yourself." The boy hugged his dad tight, understanding that this was maybe the most important lesson of all. Later that night, standing in his room, the boy pinned his certificate on the wall next to his basketball posters. The butterfly sticker sparkled in the lamplight. He thought about all the ordinary heroes he now saw every day. The crossing guard, the lunch lady who made sure no kid went hungry, the librarian who always found the right book to make someone smile. Being brave wasn't just about one big moment. It was about all the small moments too. All the times you chose to help, to care, to stand up for what's right. As he got ready for bed, he could hear the neighborhood kids playing outside, their laughter floating through his window. The world felt different now, not because it had changed, but because he saw it differently. Every day brought new chances to be brave, to be kind, to make a difference. And that, he realized, was the greatest adventure of all.